Alrighty, it's Tuesday the 23rd, day 2. I've been manning the polling booth all day. Pre-polling's open. Get down to Hannaford Centre, corner of Nelson and Darla. You can vote. Everyone is eligible for it this year. It's hard yakka. Time to go and put some sun. I'm getting oranger every day, but I wanted to say something about West Harbour Tunnel because it's a big issue. A community meeting a couple of Thursdays back in new Mayor Rochelle Porteous, some pretty useful expertise. We had Ken Welsh, who's the team leader of transport at IWC, Kendall Banfield, one of his other team members, local resident Bill Ryle, expert in mitigation on the harbour. So he's done a lot of great work on looking at the West Harbour Tunnel scheme and particularly raising concerns about the quality or lack thereof of the EIS and the EPA's contribution to it. Terrific discussion. So I sat in and watched it. The council's resolved to oppose West Harbour Tunnel, and Councillor Porteous and the Greens and Deputy Mayor Pauline Lockie, very strong. We must fight this. We must stop it. A lot of residential kind of opposition to it. Ken Welsh ran us through where we're at with it, through the route. It basically comes out from the stub crossing from the Crescent, goes past Eastern Park. It's just about under the Three Weeds, goes under Anytime Fitness on Victoria Road, under my son's house, street near Dick's Hotel, goes under the post office, kind of pretty much under the Roundtree and Macquarie Terrace roundabout, under St John's Anglican Church on Spring, starting to bend around, goes underneath the Birchie tennis courts, the cricket nets on Birchie Oval, then it kind of parallels the sort of south eastern side of Longnose Point out. Then it pops up at your old. Most of that way it's 70, 80, 90 metres underground. Towards either end though, because of the gradients and so forth, it comes up underneath Longnose. It's only 50 at the shallowest point, but that's from the highest point of some of those properties on Louisa Road. So, some of those guys have got basements, and there are genuine concerns about shift and movement. And so a lot of residents oppose it, a lot of people around here. Now I live here, this is my gaff, right? I live on Ballast Point Road, rent a little place. The place is small, but I have parks, Birchie Oval, Ballast Point Park, Mort Bay behind me. And the amenity of this area for people like me, the parks are incredibly important. And the water quality lately has been amazing, right? A lot of concerns raised about the potential for some of the really lovely homes, heritage listed homes along that route being shifting because of the tunnelling, genuine concerns. Biggest concern probably, as Dr. Bill Ryle pointed out, impact of the dredging on the water quality. As everyone knows, water quality is fantastic these last 12 or 18 months. Swimming is on again, but kids swimming in Morty down at Snail Bay, the dog beach. Dawn Fraser Pool's open. The water's just delectable, and it's a hugely important thing. Like all these big projects, the West Harbour Tunnel's got a big EIS. These days, the state governments tend to be pretty canny. They tend to flood the zone with multiple highly technical and very, very lengthy annexes. Not many people wade through these things. Very few people can understand them. Bill's one of the guys that can. He's done some great work in the past. It can be a urine site mitigation, harbour mitigation at Barangaroo, so he knows his stuff. Raised some terrific concerns, particularly about the level of contamination of the seabed between here and the particularly around the Waverton coal loader, Ball's Head, where the tunnel is going to go. About how they're planning to mitigate the risk of these contaminated silts being disturbed and contaminating the water around here, and maybe even forcing the Dawn Fraser to shut down and so forth. So there's genuine concerns, and it is a project that has real risks for us. So it's not illegitimate to be hardline. Many people want to stop it and think they can. The council has certainly adopted that position, at least publicly. And at the very least, there's a strong case to be made that we have to watch the project like a hawk and make sure we barter every step of the way for all sorts of particularly mitigation measures we could do. Now, I've done a bit of work on water quality monitoring and up the river at Para, and there are certainly people I've spoke to said that there are many things we can do for daily turbidity checks, or an online turbidity, which is cloudiness of the water, which is a great indication because contaminated particles tend to stick to sediment, and that's a good indication of just how contaminated water is likely to be. We should be pushing, as Bill Ryle says, for full-length tidal movement curtains. At the moment, the plan is just for 3 or 4 metres, not anchored to the floor, but around the digging. You can anchor it, and that's another fail-safe we could go for. There's a lot of other mitigation and compensation and amelioration and reconstitution measures we could barter into our hardline position, and there'd be all sorts of things to do. Perhaps, okay, we lose the ferry for the whole 3 years of the build. Why not get the project of the state government to supply water taxis, the pier down there off Birchie, as a, on-call demand for those who really rely on ferries to get round. Good. Make sure we get ironclad guarantees on reconstitution of the ferry. Both the services and accessibility has always been really tough for disabled people at Birchie. Why not argue that, the case for getting the West Balmain ferry service back, beef up the services here at Moore Bay? Why not talk about ship-to-shore power for East Balmain? My approach to these big projects is by all means oppose them, but this is another piece of critical state infrastructure. And just like WestConnect, there's a pretty strong chance we won't stop it. We may, but Ballast Point Park, just 50 yards down from where I live, is a testament to what really strong local action can achieve against the odds. But I think there's a really strong chance that Western Harbour Tunnel is one that we're going to have to make sure, in parallel with having an uncompromising stop the project position, we will need a very clear idea of what we want to get out of it if it goes ahead. So that brings me to the meeting we had. And again, it was a terrific meeting, a lot of people were involved, and Bill Ryle gave a terrific presentation on all of those issues I've spoken about. I'm yet to be convinced about how realistic the current disposition of council, certainly the Greens councillors and people like Pauline Lockheed. One thing that concerned me coming out of this meeting, particularly out of Ken Welsh, is the transport professionals' pitch. I'm not going to tell a professional transport strategic planner how to suck heads. His gig at the IWC is very localised. It's mostly about local traffic plan management, facilities, and necessarily his focus is on how traffic flow is going to be impacted locally. Perhaps less so on the strategic justification for this project, and in fact the whole of WestConnect. Slight amber signals go off in my brain when we skate over the advantages of the project. And by advantages and the reasons for the project, I don't mean a justification for it or to advocate for it. I mean why the state MPs would want this to go ahead. In other words, what we're up against politically. And at one point, to a specific question about this, Ken even said, well, there's not that many advantages to the project. Locally, possibly. You can have a look at the presentation yourself. Strategically, there's huge advantages, at least on paper, and that's why it's being done. They're all there on the West Harbour Tunnel and indeed WestConnect's websites. Principally, it's to do with relieving congestion on the 4 or 5 main CBD feeder routes. So the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Warringah Freeway, which feeds into it, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, Anzac Bridge, the Western Distributor. It's very clear from the numbers in the plans, in the scoping studies and the projections of the EI. We all know what traffic is like at peak hours getting in and out of the CBD, right? It's costing us something like $65,000 a day or lost productivity cost. Projected to blow out to 100k a day by 2030. Okay, you can take those numbers with a grain of salt. But the traffic analysis strategically as part of the overall Greater Sydney Traffic Plan and Transport 2056, which is about to be updated, making it pretty clear that the majority of the traffic that snarls up the CBD approach routes is not interested in going to Sydney, it just wants to get past it. Harbour Bridge, 50-50, half of it's going into the CBD, fair enough, but half of it just wants to get past it. That's on the bridge. The tunnel, right, 90% of the traffic that goes through there doesn't want a bar of Sydney, it just wants to get from the south to the north of the south. Anzac Bridge, I think, look at the numbers, it's about 63 or 4%, just wants to get past. The bulk of traffic that creates the congestion problems around Sydney on those major routes just wants to get past it. What they call the Eastern Economic Corridor, which runs from Port Botany and Mascot up to the northern beaches, but out to Macquarie Park, out to the northwest. A further north to the Central Coast. Sort of generates 45% of jobs and something like 60% of economic activity. All these things are important because that's how taxes are generated for you lefties out there. That's where your GST and your corporate tax and your income tax, people earning their wages, the churn of economic activity. Well, that's what pays for your council feel-good projects, your pride centres, your Indigenous reconciliation. Pays for our councillors' wages in an indirect way. I guess the point I'm trying to make is not to advocate for WestConnex or West Harbour Tunnel. It's simply to point out political reality. The reason you want to go into these fights to stop a capital works critical infrastructure project like this is you've got to know the numbers. What we'll be doing if we're really setting out to stop Western Harbour Tunnel is say to 130 odd MPs, we want you all to vote to shut down that project, this last component of it, which by the way, of all the WestConnex stages and phases, is probably the one that makes the most sense today. Having got to where we are with WestConnex and all the pain we've suffered, to not build the Western Harbour Tunnel would be kind of really dumb policy. A whole bunch of MPs who answer to people out in Western Sydney, North Sydney, South Sydney, Western New South Wales, South Coast North, are they going to look at us here in Birchgrove and say, listen to Jamie Parker when he goes here and says, those poor old Birchgrove residents are doing it tough with a bit of tunnelling, when their constituents are going to be saying, we haven't got a hospital yet here in, Dapto. We haven't got a school in, Mullumbimby. The other point about it is they've already built the stubs. The drilling gear is there. It's probably going to go ahead. So with all that, the final point I want to make about WestConnex in general, but West Harbour Tunnel in particular, relates to green transition and emissions reduction. And it's one of the things that drives me a bit nuts about big projects and tollways and developments like WestConnex. Over the last 20 years, electricity generation in Australia, which is our biggest cause of climate change emissions, of global warming emissions, has come steadily down really well. There's a lot we can do and have done in electricity generation to bring those down. Other areas are promising agriculture, industry, we're mitigating change all the time. Transport emissions in Australia are either always number 2 or 3. I think the number 2 at the moment is about 20 to 22% of our net emissions. Cars, trucks, right? Diesel fumes. They've been stubbornly high and there's no sign that we're reducing. If you want to reduce transport emissions, right? Tollways and freeways are actually one of your most powerful, progressive development weapons. Why? 2 reasons. Firstly, just think about it, right? Driving a B-double up and down Victoria Road, sitting stuck in traffic with his diesel engine operating at low inefficient torque, spewing it out. You see it, you can anecdotally see it. Gridlocked for 3 hours, your car idling, right? Fumes galore. Compare that to just freewheeling it through in very efficient underneath or in a tollway or freeway. It's infinitely less, right? That's purely if you don't change car use at all, right? Put a toll on it. What's a toll? It's essentially a congestion tax, right? You're making people pay money to use their stupidly inefficient, dirty car, especially as a single person in a car in traffic. You want to go to work on your own, most of inefficient and high intensity emissions generator, build a free road. You want to reduce the number of people that do that at a scale, put a toll on the road and make it expensive enough so that they say, maybe I will take that public transport after all. Which brings us to the public transport argument, which is often advanced by the Greens and the Stop WestConnex guys. They say endlessly, instead of WestConnex, we should have done more for public transport. It's either deliberately and willfully misleading or it's just a little bit uninformed. If you go and have a look at the justifications for these projects, a key second or third objective precisely is to make public transport more accessible, more efficient and more usable. People will sit in gridlock traffic in their car because they can, eat, they can listen to the radio, they've got autonomy, they can fart and scratch their, They won't do it if the bus is gridlocked. If the choice is between taking their own car, and they'll jump on a bus if the bus is going to be a freeway express, maybe underground. They can put up with public transport if it's fast and efficient and pleasant. Big part of WestConnex is all about express busways. It's all about making public transport more accessible from these regional centres. So the argument that we should have, instead of done WestConnex, do public transport, it's just irrational, because that's a big part of the reason. So that's the first reason. The first reasons are about car use and habits and how cars are used. The biggest thing about tolls, you give the state government a lever, a price signal to pull, right? A price signal, so that to phase out that car use and to nudge people into public transport, you make it more expensive over time. That is the most efficient way to change habits, right? So when the Greens argue against tollways on long-term strategic emissions and public transport and active transports, they're actually arguing against themselves, right? It's sort of enough to make you want to punch yourself in the face. Like, you can argue about the ecological impacts, you can argue about the risks, and they are real and they are genuine and they should be taken seriously. But don't argue against WestConnex on the grounds that, we should use more public transport. So to give you an example of how this stuff works, NorthConnex, which has cut transit time and cut emissions hugely on the northern suburbs. But trucks imposed a hefty toll, $25, right? What did companies like Toll start to do, the big trucking companies? They said, well, it's no longer economic for us to use NorthConnex. So they said to their drivers, start using Pennant Hills Road. Go on the freebie. Oh, gee, they outsmarted us. Well, no, they didn't, because what does the state government do, which has the power to do it? They put a $194 fine, right, on Western Hills Road truck use when they should go through the tunnel. There are levers you can pull to strategically change transport management, and tolls, right, tolls give you that capacity if it's done cleverly. First, to admit that sometimes we muck up the contract, sometimes we lock in guaranteed usage and fee settings. Absolutely, that's an own goal. But if we think strategically about this, we can use these big developments in a way that will be very good for emissions reductions in transport. So we need to think a little bit outside the knee-jerk anti-development box to make sure those levers get pulled properly. Again, the point is not to advocate on behalf of West Harbour Tunnel. The point is to say that's what we're up against politically. You're going to have to convince a whole lot of MPs to fly in the face of that strategic argument, all for the sake of not having us lose Yarrabin Park for 3 years. I'm not saying it's impossible. This is my home too, and the last thing I want to do is make myself a pariah in my own backyard, because I know and love many people who live on Louisa Road. I've delivered newspapers around here. I know the houses like the back of my hand, and they're beautiful, and it's a lovely environment, and I'll be happy to get on board and be enthusiastic about holding this project to account. As with all my approach to these big state significant projects, we've got to be clever, and we've got to make sure that we walk and chew gum at the same time. By all means try to stop it, but be absolutely ready, willing and able to make sure that if we can't stop it, we get the outcomes that are best for us all. That's it. And obviously, as a person outside the council, you don't get to understand what strategy is evolving. I'm quite sure many smart people and the councillors, that exist are across this sort of stuff too. What you would hope. But part of the meeting last Thursday was just a little bit too undergraduate for my liking. I get anxious that some of the councillors don't understand how big projects work. I think it's all just evil big business and evil, mates doing greasy deals. And first to agree, there's plenty of that flying about, but for a big strategic project like this, if that's what you think you're trying to stop, you're up against a lot more than that. So you've got to be hard-headed and make sure you're inside the tent. I think if we get this wrong in the next council, we could be in for a couple of years of pretty fruitless and ultimately defeated frustration. And then I'll have to go and go to bed. Cheers all.